An executive in disguise stepped into a store and stopped cold. Not because of chaos, not because something had gone wrong, but because of silence. All morning, one employee hadn't uttered a single word, not even once. Jonathan Reeves had spent the last 4 decades building Civic Mart from a cramped corner shop into a household regional chain with over 100 stores. At 58, he was no longer chasing expansion plans or quarterly records. The numbers didn't drive him anymore. What he wanted now was understanding. Because lately the reports on his desk weren't about profit margins or inventory shrinkage. They were about something harder to measure, about disengaged employees, stores losing their spark, and worst of all, a growing disconnect between people. And one store stood out more than the others, Civic Mart at Lincoln and 4th, right in the heart of the city, but dead last in employee morale and job satisfaction. For Jonathan, that wasn't just a red flag. It was an alarm bell. So, he made a decision most CEOs wouldn't. He stepped out of the boardroom, shaved down his signature silver beard, slipped on a light gray warehouse jacket, and became someone else. A new hire, a trainee sent from HQ. He wasn't there to be in charge. He wasn't there to be welcomed. He was there to see, to listen, to feel what couldn't be summarized in bullet points or spreadsheets. But what he didn't expect was to find someone even more invisible than himself. That very first morning, while quietly restocking dented cereal boxes under the buzzing glare of cheap fluorescent lights, Jonathan noticed a young man, thin frame, early 20s, his name tag read Noah. Noah wasn't like the others. Not because of how he looked, not because of attitude, but because of how completely silent he was. He worked tirelessly, moving boxes and aligning products with near-surgical precision. Everything he touched became tidy, organized, and orderly, like he could see the logic of the store layout in ways no one else could, like he could feel it in his bones. But he didn't speak at all. No greetings, no answers, not even when called by name. Most people just passed by him like he wasn't there. A few made their irritation obvious. Jonathan overheard one supervisor mutter with a laugh, loud enough for the room. "That kid's more useless than a muted GPS." Jonathan didn't laugh. Something inside him tightened. So he kept watching. He noticed how Noah avoided eye contact, how his body flinched whenever a loud noise rang out, a box falling, a metal cart squealing. It wasn't just discomfort. It looked like pain. He realized Noah never left the stockroom for breaks, never leaned back, never rested. He worked straight through like staying busy was the only way to stay safe. And slowly, something inside Jonathan began to shift. Noah wasn't the problem. Everyone else was just blind to the answer he represented. Because not everything worth noticing speaks aloud. Not every gift announces itself. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room isn't hiding weakness. They're carrying a kind of brilliance the rest of us forgot how to listen for. Standing in that cluttered back room, Jonathan no longer saw an anonymous employee. He saw a message, a wake-up call. And then, he saw himself. He remembered being that quiet kid, trying to prove his worth, not with words but with what he built, what he did, hoping someone, anyone, would stop long enough to notice without needing to be told. In Noah's silence, Jonathan found a piece of himself he hadn't touched in years. And from that moment on, everything began to change. Later that day, during the break, another loud joke was thrown around, this time in the staff room. "Kid's been here 6 months, said Clint, the floor supervisor, chuckling as he leaned against the fridge. "Still haven't heard more than 5 words out of him. What's the point of training someone like that?" A few laughed, dismissive, careless, like it didn't even occur to them that Noah might hear, or care, or matter. But Jonathan didn't laugh. He watched. He watched how Noah knew where every single box belonged, without glancing at a list, how his movements stayed fluid, exact, as if guided by something deeper than memory. He worked through every break without hesitation. And when someone, trying to be clever, asked him, "Why don't you ever talk?" Noah didn't just freeze, he folded, his whole body clenched inward like sound itself was something heavy pressing down on him. By noon, Jonathan's questions weren't about what was wrong with Noah. They were about what everyone else had failed to see. Because while the room had written Noah off as invisible, Jonathan was beginning to suspect Noah saw everything. And the rest of them? They were the ones missing the story. The second morning at Civic Mart 47 began the same way it always did, loud, chaotic, and a little worn out at the edges. The bell over the door chimed endlessly, shopping carts rattled over scuffed tile. The coffee machine gurgled like it was already tired. Jonathan, still wearing his Tom name tag, slipped quietly through the chaos and into the back room like a shadow. And there was Noah again. Halfway through reorganizing the paper goods aisle, his movements still precise, still silent. Reach, scan, place, repeat. No wasted energy, no uncertainty. It reminded Jonathan of something he used to say when he was young and still on the floor. Great workers move like musicians. They don't think about the notes anymore. They just feel the rhythm. But this was something deeper. Noah didn't just know the layout. He felt it, as if his body had mapped it on instinct. In the break room, though, the energy was different. Jonathan sat quietly in a corner, nibbling on a protein bar, sipping his lukewarm coffee, blending into the low buzz of morning chatter. Clint, arms crossed, leaned back and said it again, louder this time. "That kid's been here half a year and still can't string together a sentence. You can't coach that kind of disengagement." The young cashier laughed. "I swear, he's stuck on mute mode." Someone else muttered, "He creeps me out sometimes, just stares at the floor, like he's doing equations in his head." Jonathan didn't respond. He stirred his coffee, watching the comments bounce around the room like cold air seeping through cracks. They weren't yelling, they weren't hostile, but they were cruel in a way that mattered more. Subtle, casual, thoughtless. Across the room, Janine sat quietly near the microwave, wiping crumbs from her Tupperware. She didn't laugh. She didn't speak. But for just a second, just long enough, she looked at Jonathan and looked away. It was only a glance, but it told him everything. The young cashier let out a sharp laugh. "Swear he came out the box on mute," he joked, half serious. Another added with a hint of discomfort, "He gives me the creeps sometimes. Just stares at the floor like he's calculating the end of the world." Jonathan didn't say a word. He stirred his coffee slowly, watching the laughter spread like a cold breeze drifting through the room. No one yelled, no one cursed. But cruelty doesn't always need volume. It lingers like smoke, quiet, invasive, and terribly contagious. Across the room near the microwave, Janine sat silently, wiping down her Tupperware lid with a napkin. She didn't laugh, didn't chime in. She just glanced up at Jonathan for a fleeting second, then looked back down. That glance said everything. She saw it too. Late morning brought in a delayed shipment, 2 hours behind. It sent the entire stocking process into a tailspin. Clint started barking orders. Team members rushed, flustered, mistakes stacked up. Except for Noah. He didn't panic. He didn't ask for help. He just adjusted course. Subtle, focused, instinctive. While 2 other workers scrambled over inventory sheets, Noah silently reorganized the entire receiving bay in less than 15 minutes. Not a single word. He didn't need to speak. The alignment of those pallets was his voice. Jonathan stepped up beside him and offered to help unload. Noah didn't flinch, didn't sigh. He didn't speak either, but shifted slightly to give Jonathan space. Without prompting, he handed Jonathan a roll of barcode labels, nodding once when the box landed exactly where it should. They worked together for over an hour. Still no conversation, and yet it was one of the clearest, most articulate exchanges Jonathan had ever experienced. Each gesture said what words never could. By lunch, Jonathan no longer questioned Noah's silence. He questioned everyone else's emotional deafness. Later, as he made his way toward the water cooler, Jonathan passed Clint mid-conversation with another floor supervisor from a different store. "Is not cut out for customer service," Clint said, shaking his head. "Won't even make eye contact. How are we supposed to coach that?" Jonathan stopped just short of the cooler. He said nothing, no rebuttal, no dramatic reveal. But his jaw clenched, because he had built Civic Mart on one principle. Either everyone matters or no one does. And right now, that principle was being chipped away by the very people being paid to uphold it. He twisted the cap off the water bottle, took a long sip, and turned back toward the stockroom door. Maybe it was time someone started listening to the one voice no one else seemed to hear. That afternoon, the sky outside turned a thick, painterly gray. Inside, the flickering warehouse lights buzzed faintly, like the building itself was holding its breath. Still wearing the Tom name tag, Jonathan stepped quietly into the back where Noah worked. The room was a mess. Boxes everywhere, barcodes half-torn, squeaky wheels echoing across the concrete. But in the middle of the storm stood Noah, calm, centered, and strangely serene. His arms moved in rhythm, not rushed, not slow, just right. He didn't double-check labels. He didn't hesitate. And yet every item landed in exactly the right spot, fitting perfectly within Civic Mart's famously complex inventory system. Jonathan lingered behind a support beam, clipboard dangling at his side. He was supposed to be verifying counts, but all he could count now was how often Noah got it right. So far, the number was every single time. He decided to test him. Jonathan rolled over a pallet of newly arrived goods, 24 mixed items. Then, deliberately, he misarranged 3 boxes, subtle mistakes, just barely off-center, likely to go unnoticed by most. Then he backed away, pretending to busy himself with a tape gun. Noah approached, unbothered, as if he'd already seen this pallet in his mind. But then, he stopped. One by one, his hands moved. Not frantic, not fussy, just purposeful. He shifted all 3 boxes into their proper places, paused only once to smooth down a lifted corner on a label, then went right back to work like nothing had happened. Jonathan blinked. It wasn't just impressive. It was instinctual. He tried again. This time he swapped 2 nearly identical cans, peas and green beans, same size, same color. Visually indistinguishable. Noah spotted it instantly. No scoff, no eye roll. Just a quick correction, then back to the flow. Finally, Jonathan spoke. "You've got a sharp eye," he said gently. Noah didn't look up. Didn't flinch. "I said," Jonathan added, "that's really good work." Still, no response. Jonathan was just beginning to assume he wouldn't get one when Noah reached over and placed something in his hand. A barcode scanner. Without a word, Noah pointed to the SQ sheet on the shelf beside them and tapped a line twice. Jonathan followed his finger. He had miscounted. Not Noah. For the next 20 minutes, they worked side by side again. Only this time, Jonathan wasn't leading. He was following Noah's rhythm. No speech, no small talk. Just nods, gestures, silent pauses. Every motion carried meaning. Every correction answered a question without it ever needing to be asked. By shift's end, Jonathan was shaken in a way he didn't expect. The young man they dismissed as mute was the most fluent communicator in the building. He just spoke a different language. As they finished aligning the final row, Noah quietly pulled a folded piece of paper from his back pocket. Without speaking, he handed it to Jonathan, then turned away to finish closing the shipment. Jonathan unfolded it. It was a personal inventory chart, handwritten, color-coded, and detailed. It outlined strategies to reduce extra steps, speed up unloading, and prevent duplicate shipments. At the bottom, it was signed N. Miller, and beneath that, in smaller print, didn't know who to give this to. Something tightened in Jonathan's chest. He folded the paper slowly, carefully, like it might tear. Not just the paper, the trust. That night, long after the lights had gone dark and the last register had beeped closed, Jonathan sat alone in his car. The paper still rested on his lap. He didn't need a data report to know. Something had to change. Because in a world where everyone was shouting to be heard, the one person who said nothing had just told him everything. Right on time, the side door creaked open. A figure in a gray hoodie stepped inside, quiet footsteps on the tile. Noah didn't notice Jonathan at first. He walked straight to the receiving clipboard on the wall and began checking the delivery list with the same focused calm as every morning. "Good morning, Noah," Jonathan said gently. Noah paused just for a beat, then nodded, quick, deliberate. Not a greeting in words. A conversation on his own terms. They walked together to the receiving dock. Still silent, still fluid, but now their motions were perfectly synced. Unpacking crates, organizing exactly to Noah's hand-drawn chart from the day before. And the surprising thing? It worked even better than the expensive software Civic Mart had installed last year. Faster, smarter, huge. As they rolled the final crate into place, the break room door swung open. Janine stepped in, holding her usual thermos and a canvas lunch bag. She froze for just a moment at the sight of the two working together. "Tom, right?" She smiled at Jonathan, then turned to Noah. "And you early as always." Noah didn't look up, but his head tilted slightly, acknowledging her greeting. Janine walked over slowly and handed him a banana muffin wrapped carefully in a napkin. Still no sugar, just like last time. Noah blinked once, then accepted it with both hands. No smile, no words. Just quiet understanding. Noah blinked once, then accepted the muffin with both hands. He didn't smile, he didn't say thank you. But there was something unspoken between them, a quiet understanding. Gentle, complete. Janine poured herself a cup of coffee, then glanced sideways at Jonathan. "You know," she said softly, "not everyone understands kids like him." She stirred her cup, the spoon clinking faintly. "They assume if someone doesn't talk, there's nothing going on in their head." Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes held years of experience, perhaps pain. "I've got a grandson just like Noah. He taught me how to listen in a completely different way." Jonathan leaned in, curious. "What do you mean?" Janine smiled, one of those wistful, half-sad, half-proud smiles. "He doesn't say much, but give him a set of Legos, and he builds entire cities. Cities with traffic flow and zoning, bridges and underground tunnels. He doesn't need instructions, doesn't ask for help. He just sees things the rest of us don't." She paused, eyes unfocused, lost in memory. "Minds like his don't shout, they whisper. And if you learn how to listen, they'll tell you everything." Jonathan turned his gaze to Noah, who was carefully refolding the napkin around the muffin, as if it were something precious, something worth saving. Janine added, her voice low but crystal clear, There's nothing broken about him, he's just programmed differently. Maybe we've just been too loud to see what he's been seeing all along." The words echoed in Jonathan's chest like a church bell at midnight. Soft, but impossible to ignore. That afternoon, as the post-lunch rush started to fill the store again, Jonathan stood quietly at the end of aisle 12. He watched the controlled chaos unfold. Carts squeaking, voices rising, fluorescent lights flickering like nervous eyes. Clint barked orders, double-checked shelves, his brow furrowed as if the store itself had personally offended him. And in the middle of it all was Noah, the one who had corrected 3 inventory errors that morning. Unseen, unnamed, unthanked. Later that night, after everyone had clocked out and the lights had dimmed, Jonathan returned to the small office behind the stockroom. He pulled out Noah's hand-drawn chart. Slowly, deliberately, he smoothed out the creases with both hands. He read every line again, this time not as a manager, but as a student. And then he folded it back up, carefully, and slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat. Not to file away, but to carry, because Jonathan finally understood something that couldn't be found in any corporate report. Sometimes the people who make the biggest difference aren't the ones who talk the most. They're the ones who see what everyone else misses, and quietly fix what no one else even noticed was broken. The next day, a staff meeting was called. It ended without applause. No one stood up or made a speech. But as people filed out of the room, they moved slower. Something had shifted, and for the first time, maybe ever, people glanced back at Noah as they walked past. Not with judgment, but with recognition. Noah didn't change his posture, he didn't respond. But something in the air had softened. Acknowledgement had finally arrived, not in noise, but in presence. Jonathan's speech had ended, but the silence it left behind didn't feel empty. It felt nobody rushed to clock out. Not because of boredom, but because of thought. Clint stood frozen near the freezer aisle, his jaw tight, his eyes uncertain. He wasn't used to silence from others or from himself. And yet, in this moment, he had nothing to say. Because for the first time in years, Clint didn't know what to say. And maybe that was the point. In the break room, Jonathan sat beside Janine. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like a ceiling of old habits that refused to die quietly. Janine handed him a cup of lukewarm coffee. No words. They sat in silence for a few minutes. It didn't need to be filled. "I heard every word you said," she finally murmured. "But what mattered more was how you looked at him." Jonathan nodded, almost imperceptibly. "I've spent years saying Civic Mart values diversity. I've put it in every quarterly report, every training deck." He exhaled, long and slow. "But I didn't realize how narrow my own lens still was." Janine stared out toward the warehouse door. "Noah's always been different, but that doesn't make him fragile." Her voice turned firm, protective. "Good. It makes him specific. And most people don't know how to handle specific." Jonathan smiled faintly. "Please specify," he repeated. "That's a better word than broken." A few minutes later, he returned to the floor. Noah was in aisle 6, alone, methodically straightening misaligned product labels. Most employees left that task for the morning crew. But not Noah. Not the one they once assumed didn't care. This time Jonathan approached without his clipboard. No name badge disguise, no layers. Just himself. He stood beside Noah and tapped a single label that had been rotated 90 degrees. "You noticed this before anyone else, didn't you?" Noah didn't respond. He looked at the shelf, then back at Jonathan, and gave the tiniest shrug. Jonathan crouched down beside him. "You know, my first job was doing this exact thing," he said, beginning to straighten a few items himself. Narrated, "It calmed my mind, helped me think clearly." He paused. "But I always had the privilege of being seen for what I did." He looked at Noah, who didn't. Noah reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small, worn, spiral notebook. He flipped it open and handed Jonathan a page. At the top, in block letters, "Inefficiency problems that make people work harder than they should." 10 bullet points, sharp, logical, unarguable. It was brilliant, and it was entirely his. "You wrote this?" Jonathan asked, already knowing the answer. Noah nodded. "You've been carrying this around?" Another nod. "Why didn't you show it to anyone?" Noah hesitated, then gently pulled the notebook back, flipped to the bottom of the page, and underlined a single sentence he'd written months ago. "No one ever asked." Jonathan's throat tightened. That sentence, so simple, so final, hung in the air like a verdict. And right then it became painfully clear. The problem was never Noah's silence. It was everyone else's refusal to listen. "You've been speaking this whole time," Jonathan said softly. "We just weren't listening in your language." At the end of the aisle, Clint stood motionless. He had followed Jonathan, maybe to apologize, maybe to argue. But now, he didn't move. He had heard everything. And for once, he didn't look like a man preparing to defend himself. He looked like a man realizing he had missed something important, and he couldn't unmiss it now. Jonathan turned back to Noah. "I can't change how they treated you before," he said gently. "But I can promise you this. Starting today, your voice, however you choose to use it, will be heard." Noah didn't smile, but he didn't turn away either. And for a young man used to blending into shelves like they were armor, just standing still in that moment was the loudest answer he could give. Although Jonathan's undercover assignment had officially ended, he kept returning to the store. To supervise, but to observe. You aren't to learn, to feel. On one quiet Thursday afternoon, he stood at the far end of aisle 9 and witnessed a moment so small, yet so profoundly human. Noah was walking toward a young family. A child in the cart was crying. A high, sharp sound that echoed through the shelves. The mother looked overwhelmed, flustered. Strangers began to glance over, curious, irritated. Noah didn't speak. He didn't rush. He simply crouched down near a shelf, pulled out a soft, plush dinosaur from the seasonal promo bin, and gently held it out to the child. The little boy paused, blinking. Then, he hugged the toy tightly, like he'd just been handed the one thing that could make the world quiet again. Noah stood up, turned without a word, and headed back toward the stockroom. The mother mouthed, "Thank you." But Noah didn't stop. He didn't need to. Jonathan turned away, silently, discreetly, not because he was overwhelmed, but because something deep inside had just clicked. Noah hadn't just learned how to communicate. Everyone else had finally learned how to listen, and sometimes that's the bigger miracle. By the end of the month, word about Civic Mart Store 47 had begun to spread. Not through flashy PR campaigns, not through company memos or HR newsletters. People simply felt something had changed. Something real. A district manager came by, lingered longer than usual. He didn't give a speech. He just walked the aisles taking notes, watching how smoothly the stockroom moved, how the night crew had stopped double-stocking the same shelves, how employees looked each other in the eye now, slower, softer, more aware. Nora wasn't the center of attention anymore. He was something quieter, the steady heartbeat of the store. Jonathan knew that if this was going to last, it had to go beyond one location. He returned to headquarters and stood before the board with a proposal, Not just a promotion for Noah, but a new pilot initiative. Voices we miss. The idea was simple. Identify, empower, equip. Not out of charity, but as a part of the company. Not everyone understood it right away. Eyebrows raised. One executive started a sentence. But if they can't even, and then stop. Because even he could hear how outdated that thinking sounded in 2025. Jonathan didn't answer with a slide deck. He didn't bring statistics. He brought something else. A single printout of Noah's original hand-drawn inventory system, now fully digitized and adopted company-wide. On the cover, in clear font typed from Noah's device, it read, "I see what others don't." No one argued after that. At the store, the pilot program officially launched. Noah was given a new role, inventory process consultant. Less physical labor, new tech tools, direct communication with other branches. At first, he hesitated. Rana could see it in his eyes. That fear of being pushed into the spotlight, of being pulled too far from the rhythm he trusted. So they made a deal. 3 days in the stockroom, 2 days at HQ. His pace, his comfort, his joys. But what surprised everyone wasn't just how good Noah was. It was how eager others were to learn from him. Miguel, the cashier, started asking to shadow Noah during inventory resets. Janine launched a small mentorship program called Quiet Strength, pairing veteran employees with newcomers who struggled to communicate verbally. Even Clint, the very same Clint who had once written Noah off, rewrote the entire onboarding checklist and included visual diagrams designed by Noah. One afternoon, a film crew from HQ arrived to capture footage for internal training. There was a technical issue. The lights flickered. The audio system cut out. Panic began to ripple through the crew. No audio, no interviews. Then, at the end of the aisle, Noah, quiet as ever, pressed a few buttons on his device and held up the screen. It read, "You don't need sound to hear what matters." The director laughed, then turned to the camera crew. "That's the tagline. Use it." The pilot was approved company-widely the next quarter. But for Jonathan, the real success came in silence. No applause, no meetings, just a visit, one quiet Thursday. He came alone, no entourage, no agenda, just a notebook, a pen, and time. He watched Clint showing a new employee how to read product codes using a laminated visual chart, designed by Noah. He saw Janine arranging a quiet recovery nook with books and headphones. To Miguel in the break room teaching 2 new hires how to navigate Noah's system. He tapped the side of his head and whispered, "This is the good stuff, the real stuff." And in the center of it all was Noah. Still quiet, still deliberate, but no longer alone. After lunch, Jonathan sat beside Noah in the staff locker area. Before he could even say hello, Noah had typed out a question. "Did you think I wouldn't last?" Jonathan chuckled, surprised by the directness. "No," he said honestly. "I thought we didn't deserve to keep you." Noah looked down. Ben typed again. "You do now." It wasn't a compliment. It wasn't drama. It was simply true. Current, through action, and through change. Through listening. That weekend, a company waste email was sent out. Subject line: the new standard. It wasn't just a policy update. It was a framework, written by Noah and others like him, people who had never once been invited into the room before. It included an inclusive hiring practices, neurodiverse-friendly communication strategies, mentorship program guidelines, a new initiative called See Beyond the Surface. It ended with a quote typed by Noah. "I don't want to be the exception. I want to be the beginning." And that's exactly what he became. 6 months later, Civic Mart reported a 12% increase in internal promotions for previously overlooked employees, measurable rise in customer satisfaction across pilot stores, but most importantly, a shift in language. Managers asked more questions. Employees paused before judging. The entire company started listening on purpose. On the 1-year anniversary of the program, Jonathan returned to store 47. He didn't give a speech. He simply walked each aisle, nodding softly to the familiar faces. Near the customer service desk, he saw a small plaque etched in brushed metal. Everyone has a voice. Some just speak differently. Dedicated to Noah Miller, who helped us all hear better. And somewhere in the back of the store, between perfectly stacked pallets, a quiet young man kept working. Not for praise, not for applause, but because he knew every inch of that store better than anyone else. And now, finally, the store knew him back. Thank you for staying with us through this emotional, true story. Have you ever met someone quiet, someone who made a difference without asking for attention? They may not have said much, but they may have changed everything around them. If this story moved you or made you see the world a little differently, don't forget to subscribe to Moments of Quiet Truth, where we believe that every soul deserves to be heard. See you in the next story.